At first glance, Lamar Miller Whitehead gave off the vibe of a successful New Yorker. In 2005, he purchased a home in Teaneck that cost nearly $500,000. He was always decked out in the latest fashions and was often spotted in a luxurious mink coat. While driving around in his Land Rover SUV, he displayed all the trappings of wealth. In reality, authorities determined that his money didn't come from his music industry connections, as he claimed, but through a joint criminal enterprise that included stealing the identities of multiple victims and making extravagant purchases with the ill-gotten cash and credit. Investigators had been trailing him since a suspected accomplice was arrested in 2004, and police finally caught up with him in 2006. By that time, prosecutors said Whitehead had stolen at least $2 million through the scam, and he faced several charges related to identity theft. While searching his Teaneck home, police recovered a stolen firearm, a cherry on top of the fraud charges. Whitehead used the stolen identities to open lines of credit in his victims' names. But authorities wouldn't understand the true scope of the scam until they concluded the investigation. Whitehead was convicted and sent to prison, though he emerged years later with a new persona and claimed to be a man of God. In addition to launching a church of sorts, he threw his hat in the ring as a candidate for Brooklyn Borough President. Along the way, he made some powerful friends and allies, including New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Meanwhile, he maintained that he was innocent of all the charges that led to his incarceration. As a political candidate, Whitehead emphasized his commitment to restoring the right to vote for individuals with a felony conviction on their criminal records. In 2021, he praised then-Governor Andrew Cuomo for signing a bill that would do precisely that. He also used the opportunity to proclaim his belief that he was wrongfully convicted years earlier. His victims and critics were skeptical that Whitehead had authentically turned his life around. Still, many others were drawn in by his promises and flowery language when he launched Leaders of Tomorrow International Churches with campuses across the Big Apple. The organization's website portrays him as a radical, revolutionary, innovative, anointed, and cutting edge, and describes some of the challenges he has faced throughout his life. As an infant, the site explains, Whitehead was left without a father when local politician Arthur Miller was killed by a group of police officers. That experience reportedly contributed to Whitehead's commitment to activism and political involvement. As for his stint in prison, the church website insists that Whitehead was illegally convicted and sentenced to 11 1/3 to 34 years in prison, which was one of the most challenging periods in his life. After serving 6 years behind bars, he was released and, according to the site, used the experience to launch a program designed to keep troubled youth from venturing down the wrong path. In 2014, Whitehead became an ordained pastor. 2 years later, he was named a bishop and used that title when running for borough president and in other public settings. His church's honorable intentions didn't do much to reform his image among those who still saw him as an ex-con. Former New York police officer Eric Adams was elected mayor in 2021 and quickly began implementing changes that he believed would make New York a safer and more prosperous city. Before running for this office, Adams had served as Brooklyn Borough President and a state senator, making a few local connections along the way. According to Whitehead, the two men became close, and in a series of social media posts ahead of the election, he urged his followers to cast a ballot for Adams. He frequently referred to the mayor as a mentor and friend and celebrated Adams' win in the Democratic primary race. At the time, Whitehead wrote that Adams had taught him a lot. He believed Adams was the best man for the mayor's job. Several photos of the two men posing together have been posted prominently on Whitehead's social media profiles. In 2016, Adams corroborated Whitehead's claims in a statement that signaled a close connection between the two men. Specifically, Adams cited similarities in their respective backgrounds and said that Whitehead deserves the same support and guidance he received as a young man. Adams was arrested at 15 years old, and because people embraced him when he was arrested, he wanted to help Whitehead. Whitehead has become a somewhat prominent figure in New York, but it's not just because of his criminal past and close ties to the mayor. In May 2022, the city was rocked by news of a fatal subway shooting aboard the Q train in Manhattan. Andrew Abdullah was later arrested and charged with counts including the death of passenger Daniel Enriquez. The suspect turned himself into authorities at a location near the offices of the Manhattan Legal Aid Society. Despite the violent nature of the crime, Abdullah was taken into custody without any resistance or complication. On cue, Whitehead was prepared to take credit for the peaceful surrender. As As for whether or not he played a pivotal role in the process, seems to depend on who you ask. As Whitehead asserted at the time, he planned to use his connections to the suspect and Adams as a way to facilitate a peaceful surrender. According to the plan, Whitehead and Abdullah were supposed to walk into a local police precinct together. There, the mayor would ensure the suspect was booked into custody. In the end, however, the drop-off point was changed and Abdullah's family went with him to turn himself in instead of Whitehead. The ex-con turned pastor explained that Abdullah had been a member of his church and said that concerned relatives reached out to him following the unprovoked subway shooting. According to Whitehead, Abdullah's aunt and mother reached out to him asking for his advice. He went on to note that he became close with Abdullah's family after the death of a young relative and wanted to do whatever he could to help everyone involved following the incident on the Q train. According to his public statement, his first piece of advice to Abdullah's aunt was to encourage the suspect to surrender. He stressed the importance of securing legal representation for the accused and establishing an agreement with detectives to allow him to turn himself in. From there, Whitehead said he phoned his buddy, the mayor, to advise him of the latest developments. Adams allegedly agreed with the terms of the surrender and offered to help facilitate a smooth encounter between police and Abdullah. Whitehead promised Abdullah and Mayor Adams would meet the family at the 5th Precinct. However, a short time later, the bishop received several phone calls from law enforcement officials and detectives who had heard about the plan. Eventually, Abdullah's family decided to take him to an attorney's office instead of the precinct. Despite the change of plans, Whitehead said he continued to support the family and did what he could to ensure a peaceful surrender. He waited with the aunt and the grandmother, and when he went to greet his mother, Abdullah got out of the car and the marshals took him in. Whitehead described the arrest as a bum rush. The Legal Aid Society seemed to back up Whitehead's story of the police officer's response. They said that before Andrew Abdullah could voluntarily surrender himself to the local precinct, he was needlessly ambushed out front of the Manhattan trial office by city marshals and denied of his opportunity to first consult with counsel. Although the incident didn't play out as Whitehead envisioned, he said Adams praised his efforts and declared that the intervention protected our city. Abdullah's defense attorney, on the other hand, offered a different account of events. Kristen Bruin asserted that Whitehead had no affiliation with the family or legal team, calling his claims of involvement in the process untrue. The mayor's office didn't do much to clarify things. It offered only a vague statement via spokesperson Fabian Levy, who said there's a violent man off the street. New Yorkers should thank the NYPD for apprehending this dangerous individual. In the end, it's unclear whether Whitehead was involved in orchestrating the surrender. We can't say how much he really helped the situation if he was. Some people might choose to believe the words of a pastor. Still, given his complicated past and the contradictory account of Abdullah's attorney, it's clear that Whitehead isn't as credible as he wants his fellow New Yorkers to believe. Like other controversial pastors, Whitehead attracted public criticism after Abdullah's surrender when he showed up in a Rolls-Royce and was spotted wearing a high-end luxury jacket. Although he dismissed the backlash by insisting he was reacting to an emergency situation and had been engaged in personal business that required his dressy look. Nevertheless, it was just the latest example of bad optics in light of a six-figure judgment against him that was handed down more than a decade earlier while he was still behind bars. In 2009, a court determined that Whitehead owed $261,000 to a symphony conductor named Maximo Bragado Darman to repay an outstanding loan. Brian Etta, who had been a volunteer for Adams' 2007 campaign to become borough president, also sued Whitehead for allegedly stealing nearly $20,000 during the sale of a home. Although Etta eventually dropped the suit because Whitehead was already in prison by that time, he expressed concern over the swindler's apparent connection to Adams. He didn't think Adams would keep a guy like Whitehead in his inner circle. It just didn't make sense. The recent display of wealth wasn't the first time the bishop turned heads with his lavish spending after his release from prison. News outlets reported in 2016 that Whitehead could be seen driving around the city in a pair of luxury vehicles, a Maserati and a Bentley, even as he still owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to the conductor. His involvement in Leaders of Tomorrow international churches has also led to criticism, and his feeble attempts to explain himself have only created more questions. When one reporter asked about the questionable attempt to register as a non-profit organization, Whitehead dismissed the entire line of questioning and shot back, asking why the reporter wanted to know that. He initially portrayed the organization as a non-profit aimed at helping young people. Then, prosecutors sent him a stern letter instructing him to stop misrepresenting specific facts about the organization and its supporters. So, Whitehead restructured the entire plan, and Leaders of Tomorrow international churches began operating as a for-profit entity because its website prominently features a donation button, there seems to be no doubt that the bishop is still trying to make as much money as possible from this supposedly holy venture. With his questionable past and outstanding debt against him, it's no wonder that Whitehead isn't eager to entertain any suspicion that he's still scamming victims to support his life of luxury. After repeatedly calling Adams a mentor, it might make sense that he's following in the mayor's footsteps by launching his own bid to become Brooklyn Borough President. In addition to supporting causes that would help rehabilitate formerly incarcerated New Yorkers, his campaign emphasized programs to provide equal access to education. He wants to use the position to bring needed resources to underserved communities, believing zip codes shouldn't determine one's education and future. Although he received some support based on his connections and ability to campaign effectively in various neighborhoods throughout Brooklyn, his controversial past likely doomed his effort from the start. Whitehead lost the race, and former city councilman Antonio Reynoso took over as borough president. Despite his best efforts to portray himself as an activist and man of God, it seems that he simply can't shake his image as a con man and crook. And even though he claims to be a bishop, Whitehead isn't immune to the crime wave that's happening in 2022. He claimed that he and his wife were robbed of more than $1 million in jewelry while he was preaching at church on Sunday, July 24th, 2022. He was actually live streaming from inside his church when it happened, and videos show at least one person pointing a gun at Whitehead and interrupting his sermon. Whitehead claims that they took off his bishop's ring, his wedding band, and his bishop chain. And he also had chains underneath his robe. According to Whitehead, the thief started tapping his neck to check if he had on anything else. To Whitehead, that meant they knew who he was and they had been watching him. And Whitehead definitely wants justice. One big step to not getting robbed is to stop flexing on Instagram. Kenneth Copeland is in the business of saving souls. As his bank account statements would attest to, it's a very lucrative business. This famous televangelist spends his time preaching into a TV camera, hooting and hollering to his viewers about the merits of living a godly life and the blessings provided to those who donate to his church. But what's the truth behind Kenneth Copeland's ministry? Before we get on learning about the luxurious life of Kenneth Copeland, let's talk about our sponsor for today's video, Adam and Eve. Use the code Pablito to get half off one item and get free shipping in the US and Canada. Here's why we love Adam and Eve at Pablito's Way. No matter what you buy, everything is in a discreet package. There's 24/7 customer service along with a 90-day no-hassle return policy. And the best part is, Adam and Eve donates 20% of their profits to fight the spread of HIV around the world. Again, use the code Pablito to get half off of one item. Some exclusions apply, and get free shipping in the US and Canada. Thank you to Adam and Eve with helping to keep the lights on at Pablito's Way. Now, let's get back to Kenneth Copeland's millionaire lifestyle. Are Copeland's grand gestures of faith genuine or just a front used to pry cash away from folks who believe every word he says? While we may never know the true nature of Kenneth Copeland's heart, his extremely lavish lifestyle and questionable business practices imply that the bug-eyed Bible thumper has more interest in his bottom line than anything else. The 84-year-old Texan and his family are worth hundreds of millions of dollars thanks to his massive empire, TV personality, and business ventures. Although one might assume a devout believer would use their fortune to support charitable and religious efforts, Copeland has his eyes on worldly possessions above all else. A large portion of his fortune funds his extravagant life, a life filled with unnecessary luxuries that he claims to be gifts bestowed upon him by God. Copeland wasn't always the world's most popular televangelist. Although Kenneth Copeland Ministries now reaches many thousands of people on a regular basis, the man himself came from very humble beginnings. Before turning to the church, Copeland led a life that had nothing to do with religion at all. He was a licensed pilot, something he had always wanted to be after growing up near an Air Force airfield. He briefly dabbled in music, releasing a Billboard Top 40 hit in 1957 called Pledge of Love.
He was high and lifted up, the music grew with majesty as strings and organs sang.
Alas, his singing career was short-lived, and he was ultimately a one-hit wonder. It was around this time that he decided to devote his life to Christian ministry. His gospel journey officially began in 1966 when he enrolled at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The university is named after the legendary Oral Roberts, who's generally considered the founding father of the charismatic Christian movement. Charismatic Christianity is an expression of the faith that focuses on outward examples of God working in the lives of believers. More specifically, those who subscribe to the charismatic movement emphasize the importance of being baptized in the Holy Spirit and are interested in developing spiritual gifts, which are unnatural abilities handed down by the Holy Spirit to certain individuals to help others. Basically, they're praying for superpowers. Copeland arrived at Oral Roberts University with his wife Gloria, their 2 kids, and not a penny to his name. Although the sudden move from Texas made little sense at the time, he said he had been called by God to make the journey. How would he maintain his pilot gig while keeping up with his academics and taking care of his family? Copeland had no idea, but he felt like it was the right move, and it paid off in a big way. Through a stroke of good fortune, Copeland became the chauffeur and personal pilot for none other than Oral Roberts himself. One of the most prominent televangelists of all time, the godfather of the movement Copeland would one day help lead himself, had taken young Copeland in and became something of a mentor to him. So it's easy to see how Copeland became the man he is today. Copeland took everything Roberts taught him and, with his wife, took the biggest step of their lives. In 1967, they started their own ministry, Kenneth Copeland Evangelistic Association, which would eventually grow into Kenneth Copeland Ministries, the religious behemoth known around the globe today. The ministry saw steady growth during the 1970s. They were initially spreading their message in a 4-page newsletter read by about 3,000 people in 1973. After moving to radio in 1975 and eventually adding a weekly television broadcast in 1979, Copeland quickly became one of the loudest voices in Christian media. In 1989, their top-rated daily TV show, Believer's Voice of Victory, officially entered the picture, and the Copeland empire was off and running. The Believer's Voice of Victory program still airs today, and it provides the basis for the massive operation Copeland now spearheads. According to the official ministry's website, the show reaches 2.3 billion potential viewers. That's almost a third of the world's population that could be tuning in at any given time. However, that's not to say that they're actually watching. If it seems like Copeland's show is always on, that's because it is. In 2015, the ministry launched the Believer's Voice of Victory Network, known today as the Victory Channel. This is an entire TV channel devoted to Copeland-related programming. That means Kenny around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No wonder he's become such a recognizable face, even if most people know him as that crazy pastor guy on TV that tried to cure COVID. Whatever you think of his brand, Copeland and his family are certainly enjoying the fruits of his ministry's labor. His over-the-top personality and message of prosperity rakes in donations on a daily basis. Copeland's estimated net worth? About $300 million. That's a lot of dough, and it's earned him his place as the richest pastor in the world. How exactly did preaching the gospel on TV earn Copeland that kind of outrageous cash? It's important to know what Copeland says to his audience to understand why they're willing to donate so much money to his ministry. Kenneth Copeland is one of the biggest supporters of prosperity gospel. In case you haven't been following our channel lately, we'll go over prosperity gospel briefly again. It's the idea that God financially blesses those who give to the church and perform good deeds. While it's never explicitly described in the Bible, this belief system has become widely popular thanks to televangelists like Copeland, Joel Osteen, and Creflo Dollar, who tell their large viewerships to hand over their money and obey the rules laid out in the Bible faithfully. If they do this, their wealth will multiply as a result, or so they say. The message of prosperity gospel is criticized for preying on those who are struggling financially. These folks hear a guy like Copeland and think God will turn their lives around if they just send him some money. What's a few dollars in donations when there's $1 million reward waiting for you? Copeland has snared more than a few individuals in his prosperity trap, and his enormous net worth speaks to its effectiveness. The televangelism giant doesn't hold back from acknowledging his tremendous wealth either. In an Inside Edition interview, Copeland not only admitted to being a wealthy man, he boasted about it, claiming it was a sign of his devotion to God's work, devotion that's been rewarded with a great flood of cash. Copeland also says that his expansive property is home to copious oil reserves, which has resulted in even more profits for the multimillionaire. Although the Bible describes a humble existence for God's followers, Kenneth Copeland certainly doesn't do that. He lives in a sprawling $10.8 million estate that sits directly adjacent to the Kenneth Copeland Airport. It's safe to say that his church-funded home looks more like the Playboy Mansion. And you heard that right, his church has an airport. The church-sponsored hangar houses the ministry's private aircraft collection, which includes a pricey Gulfstream 5 private jet that Copeland bought from actor Tyler Perry in 2018. Copeland came under a considerable amount of fire for buying the luxury jet, with many questioning its necessity. Oh, and by the way, he already owned 2 other private planes at the time. Copeland vehemently defended his decision to drop millions of dollars on the luxury jet, stating it was a necessary purchase given the global scale of his work. As he claimed in the Ambush Inside Edition interview, his ministry doesn't have the resources it needs to fulfill all of the many commitments it has lined up around the world. Tyler Perry's Gulfstream jet would help with that, or so Copeland insists. In 2010, for example, Copeland's ministry had promised to provide substantial aid to the disaster relief efforts in Haiti after a devastating earthquake hit. The relief assistance program was dubbed Angel Flight 44. Well, despite the lofty promises, Angel Flight 44 never took off. A spokesperson for the Copeland brand would later explain that they simply didn't have their planes in proper working order, denying that the ministry had ever officially committed to any relief effort in the first place. As a result, Copeland's critics ripped Copeland apart for the debacle and that he used the incident to justify buying Tyler Perry's jet. He needed it to do God's work, you see. The plane wasn't so he could fly between his various vacation homes, which he was ultimately caught doing. Copeland's involvement with Huckabee's bid for the presidency raised a lot of eyebrows. As a result, Kenneth Copeland Ministries, along with 5 other televangelist organizations, were investigated by a Senate committee led by Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley following the situation with Huckabee. The purpose of the investigation was to uncover any hole in the tax exemption laws that might permit organizations such as Copeland's to cheat the system. The Senate inquiry, which spanned 4 years, did not discover any concrete evidence of wrongdoing on the part of Copeland's ministry. However, financial analysts of all sorts agreed that there was something fishy about the way they ran things over at Kenneth Copeland Ministries. Members of Copeland's family have benefited directly from the ministry's work and vice versa. This includes Ken's son, John Copeland, who started his very own ranching business on 33 acres of his father's church property. The land was quadrupled in value, and the church received another tax benefit for using their land for agricultural purposes. In all, 15 members of the Copeland family were found to be on the ministry's payroll, with a combined yearly salary coming out to more than $1 million. Furthermore, Gloria Copeland's brother-in-law is the president of a media company that buys television time for Kenneth Copeland Ministries. That company, ironically called Integrity Media, charges an extremely discounted rate for the TV time it acquires. There's nothing technically illegal about any of this, but it calls into question the real motivation behind some of Ken Copeland's work. Is it really all for the glory of God? Perhaps, but there's plenty of evidence on the contrary. As if all that wasn't enough, Copeland has found himself in hot water several other times over the years. In 2015, comedian John Oliver did an entire segment on his show, Last Week Tonight, centered around Copeland and other televangelists. Oliver started his own fake church playfully called Our Lady of Perpetual Exemption as part of the show. The point was to highlight the immense amount of untaxed donations ministries like Copeland gets from viewers who buy into their prosperity gospel message. Oliver succeeded in exposing the sketchy nature of these transactions, collecting many thousands of dollars in donations in just 1 week, much of which would not be taxed. Oliver ended up giving all the money he obtained to Doctors Without Borders rather than hoarding it for himself, but the televangelists he satired are not so generous. There's also the tragic story of Bonnie Parker, a cancer patient who chose to donate all of her money to Ken Copeland's church rather than seek professional medical help for her condition. She believed Copeland when he said God would heal her if she sowed her money properly. In 2004, Parker passed away, neglecting to receive the treatments she desperately needed. Nevertheless, Copeland pocketed her money all the same. Copeland showed off his total disregard for science once again just this past year during his now infamous COVID-19 rant. In a completely unhinged segment, Copeland stared into the camera, offered out his hand, and used the transcendent healing power he wields to end the global pandemic and heal all those afflicted with the virus. It was an absurd stunt that serves as the latest example of Copeland's outlandish behavior. Behavior clearly meant to entice donations from his audience. Even though so many Americans, including many who watch his program, lost their jobs as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak, Copeland insisted that they should continue to offer up donations to his ministry and that doing so would bless them financially in the long run. The prosperity gospel at its most manipulative. Despite his many glaring flaws and the multitude of controversies, Kenneth Copeland and his ministry will continue to flourish as he approaches the twilight of his life. Why is he so popular? There's a certain irresistible hope in the message he spouts to his avid viewers. People love to hear that they're going to be rich and God is going to bless them. It's an uplifting thing to be told. Unfortunately, for those who resonate with the prosperity gospel's message, there are leeches in the holy water that seek to profit from their vulnerability. So is Copeland a true man of the cloth, or just another leeching preacher who's looking to steal your money? Jesse Duplantis is yet another prosperity preacher who's grabbed headlines with his extravagant spending. It isn't any surprise Duplantis caught the attention of the Trinity Foundation, a watchdog group that aims to keep people like him in check. Duplantis got on their radar not by buying just one private jet, but by buying 3 different private jets. How exactly does Jesse Duplantis defend asking his followers for money to spend millions on private jets? Jesse Duplantis was born in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1949. The city he grew up in is known for its culture steeped in vibrance, elegance, and tradition. Growing up in an era of growth and change, especially in the Deep South, gave Duplantis a front row seat to history in the making. Civil rights activists like Martin Luther King brought attention to the need for change in the Crescent City. By the time Duplantis was about 10, New Orleans finally desegregated their public school system, a pivotal moment for the civil rights movement. Though he would one day convert, Duplantis came from a long line of devout Catholics. Catholicism is prevalent to this day in Louisiana. Even the world-renowned Mardi Gras celebration stems from Catholic beliefs. It wasn't far-fetched to predict Duplantis' future as a minister. However, what some may not have seen coming was his adoption of Pentecostal prosperity preaching, also known as the "Give me all your money" gospel. His southern charm and charisma ironed out a nice spot for Duplantis in the world of prosperity preaching, right up there with the likes of Kenneth Copeland, Joel Osteen, and Creflo Dollar. Duplantis gave his first TV sermon at 27 years old, introduced on the Trinity Broadcast Network as the Apostle of Joy. That moniker would become something of a catchphrase for him. By 1978, Duplantis was a full-time evangelical preacher. His way of bringing comedy and music to followers would one day build him an empire, a very luxurious one indeed. The Apostle of Joy, like his brethren of prosperity preachers, lives the good life. Preaching verses from the Bible like "the Lord shall provide" has been quite lucrative for Duplantis all these years. His assets are fit for a king, compliments of the millions in donations received by his followers. His ministry has amassed luxury items such as 3 private jets, multiple high-end cars, and we haven't even gotten to his house yet. The 2-story, 25-room home equipped with 6 bedrooms, 7 full bathrooms, a theater, kitchen, dining room, and whatever a fun room is considered a rectory and thus paid for by the tax-exempt church. Duplantis' home is the largest property in Desterin, part of the St. Charles Parish in Louisiana. When we use the word parish, we don't mean in terms of a church. Louisiana is the only state in the U.S. that uses the word parish instead of county when referring to a cluster of towns. It derives from Spanish and French roots in the Roman Catholic Church dating back to the 1800s. Many southern states operated this way, but Louisiana is the only one to stick with it. Desterin, a small 8-square-mile town and part of St. Charles Parish, is 23 miles outside Duplantis' New Orleans birthplace. So, as imagined, Duplantis' 32,000 square foot home is quite the spectacle in the humble town, especially when it comes to property taxes. Duplantis' ministry owns the home, meaning it's completely tax exempt. According to a parish tax expert, this leaves the estimated $33,000 annual tax strain on the community's doorstep. But even with a luxury home, Duplantis still can't seem to stay in one place. Flight records show he is quite the frequent flyer, with nearly 2,500 flights logged, including 16 trips to Hawaii and 11 trips to Las Vegas by 2006. Of course, these were all for ministry business, right? Between the fuel and operating costs, the The estimated expense of a round-trip flight starts at around $14,000. When Duplantis could easily spend a couple of $100 on commercial flight, which the church would cover, it's hard to see how he can justify the spending. For a man like Duplantis, who seems to enjoy center stage, he didn't show the same interest during a book signing when asked a few questions about his planes. His southern charm was nowhere to be found when Inside Edition's Lisa Guerrero addressed headlines of his lavish spending and multi-million-dollar planes. Guerrero was cut short by Duplantis, who refused to answer any questions regarding his spending. Then, Duplantis' security detail locked arms around Guerrero and forcibly dragged her away. She can be seen telling the men not to touch her and asking Duplantis why his people were putting their hands on her. The world-renowned Christian preacher didn't show any mercy for Guerrero, who was clearly uncomfortable through the entire ordeal. Duplantis couldn't be bothered with how his team handled the reporter that day, though. He made sure to get details for his sermon the next day. In his trademark comedic style, he bragged to his congregation about how his security team handled her. He even joked about how his security team made her outside edition. Not all heroes wear capes, and this is certainly the case with Trinity Foundation. They have made it their mission to hold religious leaders like Duplantis accountable for their actions. As the world watches televangelists like Duplantis and Copeland buy private planes and airports under their ministry's tax-exempt status, the Trinity Foundation is investigating their lavish spending as well as abuse allegations. Many prosperity preachers seem untouchable, hiding behind religious exemptions and misusing donations at their whim. Another sad issue is the abuse that is often hidden and undocumented with many religious organizations. That's where the Trinity Foundation comes in. Founded in 1972 by Ole Anthony, based in Dallas, Texas, this watchdog group keeps tabs on televangelists. Trinity Foundations was started to research the demographics of religious television programs. When the 80s and 90s brought major scandal involving abuse and fraud allegations against religious leaders, the Trinity Foundation became something of a watchdog group. By gathering information through various means, they have played a crucial part in taking down televangelists who abuse their power. They have a vast library of broadcasts, televangelists, and Christian TV networks like TBN and Daystar. They keep notes on broadcasts and go to great lengths to find the truth. This has included dumpster diving, keeping tabs on spending, and undercover work in the ministry themselves. The founder, Ole Anthony, has a presence similar to that of Clint Eastwood, gritty, raw, and disgusted by televangelists taking money from the poor and gullible. The Trinity Foundation has done so much legwork, state and federal agencies often call on them for assistance. The list of televangelists that Trinity Foundation has taken down is impressive, including famous pastor Robert Tilton. Tilton became the subject of an IRS probe due largely to the Trinity Foundation uncovering his fraud. It's not surprising that Duplantis has been on Trinity's radar for well over a decade now. His lavish spending and luxurious lifestyle, combined with the media attention he brought on himself, has caused federal agencies to zero in on him and his ministries. Due to his flashy tactics, accusations now include conversion and inurement. So what does that all mean? Conversion is when you use the money raised from donors to benefit for-profit businesses. Inurement is basically living an excessive lifestyle while receiving tax exemption. Vacations in Hawaii while claiming tax-exempt status are a pretty good example. If the IRS finds abuse of these or any tax laws, it could mean severe penalties for Duplantis and his ministry. For Duplantis and any other prosperity preacher, the worst of those penalties would be the revoking of their tax-exempt status. Unfortunately, it's an uphill battle, and the hill is pretty much a vertical line. Trinity has worked with Congress before without gaining any traction. Trinity paired with Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley to dig into these TV preachers' spending habits and lifestyles. After working for years on an investigation into some major players in the televangelist community, their efforts were in vain. Only 2 of the ministers cooperated with the senator by divulging their spending reports. None of the others, including Kenneth Copeland, budged. The investigation imploded, and nobody has raised a finger to these tax-exempt millionaires ever since. Instead of laying low and giving some thought to the allegations against him, Duplantis doubled down. Forever the shameless showboat, Duplantis publicly asked his followers for $54 million to buy a new private jet. Was Duplantis trying to taunt the watchdogs at Trinity, or was it sheer greed driving his obnoxious financial request? The plane in question is a Falcon 7X, and Duplantis needs this one because of its capabilities. What does this plane have that his 3 other planes don't have? Yes, 3 other planes are available to Duplantis from his ministry's collections. His issue is that those planes can't always fly non-stop. The Falcon 7X can. He proclaimed with conviction, Jesus wanted him to have that Falcon 7X. Yep, Jesus totally specified that plane to Duplantis. The Dassault Falcon 7X is coined as the first business jet with a digital flight control system. With a length of over 76 feet, there are several floor plan options to tailor the plane to your liking. Affluent doesn't begin to cover it with this jet. With only 270 of them in use across 41 countries to this day, it's not your average private plane. During an interview about the extreme request, Duplantis said that he knew, in his heart of hearts, if Jesus was here, he wouldn't be riding a donkey, he would be flying a plane. Duplantis is not the first to make such a request from his devout following. Creflo Dollar and Copeland both asked their followers to foot the bill for their private jets. Copeland even has his own airport next to his multi-million-dollar home. Copeland also famously refused to fly commercial since he didn't want to be in a metal tube with demons. This request may have gone a little too far, even for Duplantis' followers. Comments and opinions seemed torn against him, but Duplantis reacted joyfully at all the media attention at first, talking about how he had never got so much press before. He even claimed to be happy for the press, negative or positive. Duplantis barked back, claiming he never asked for money. Like most prosperity preachers, Duplantis claims he was merely willing a $54 million plane into his possession. He wants his followers to believe a private jet into existence with him. Duplantis has openly expressed his need for a new jet and urges his followers to make that happen on several media outlets. This includes his magazine, where he tells his 750 million followers that he needs this plane and believes God will give it to him. If Duplantis can materialize a private jet on nothing but the prayers of his followers, somebody needs to get him his own magic show in Las Vegas. After receiving a great deal of backlash for such an extreme and greedy request, Duplantis began to backpedal, throwing blame at the press for embellishing his words. To save some face, he claimed he'd donate his old plane once he got his new one. He needed this new plane to save money spreading the gospel. He claims he'd be able to fly much cheaper since he owns a fuel farm and wouldn't have to waste time and money filling up somewhere else. Since the scandal broke, Duplantis has stayed out of the news. That includes any further developments on investigations done by the Trinity Foundation. Apparently, his prayers are currently cluttering God's answering machine because it's unclear if he ever got his hands on that Falcon 7X. We can say for sure that a guy like Duplantis would have let us know about it by now. For today's video on Benny Hinn, we'd like to give a big thank you and shout out to Mad New Yorker for the suggestion. If you ever have a video suggestion, be sure to let us know by dropping a comment in the comment section or by DM on Instagram. Televangelists are known for their loyal fan bases. At the same time, they make for some of the most disloyal and dishonest characters. Benny Hinn is a shining example of it. His popularity boomed after building an empire on his preaching and alleging God gave him the power to heal people. While numerous media outlets and undercover investigations have widely disputed his claims, he has remained a strong name in his ever-expanding community of faithful followers. As time has gone by, his so-called healing crusades became more like healing charades. But we can't help but wonder, even after on-camera proof that Hinn is a liar, why do people still go to him for healing? Benny Hinn was born in Jaffa, Israel in 1952. A newly founded state, the conflicts in Israel would soon disrupt the lives of many of its residents, forcing them to migrate. Hinn's family was forced to move in 1967 because of the Arab-Israeli War. Commonly known as the Six-Day War, this confrontation between Israel and the Arab coalition formed by Jordan, Syria, and Egypt was one of many altercations that caused instability in the lives of many locals. Hinn's family migrated to Canada, where he was raised Eastern Orthodox. It wasn't until high school that he was introduced to evangelical Christianity. By 21, he became a born-again Christian, much to his parents' worry. His favorite pastor was evangelist Catherine Coleman, who became an influential figure in his life, as many draw comparisons between her and Hinn's style. Years later, after moving to the U.S., he founded the Orlando Christian Center in 1983. This was the start of his meteoric rise as one of the most famous televangelists in the world. He started performing healing services in churches across the nation. Claiming God had selected him personally, he embarked on his signature Miracle Crusades, which were held at large stadiums all over the country and looked more like an elaborate rock concert. In 1989, he held his first televised Miracle Crusade. It wasn't long after that he got his own daily TV show, This Is Your Day. Added to this, Hinn published various books about his ministry, faith, and life, and sold them with much success. In comparison, many famous televangelists are born in the southern states, mainly because of the popularity of Christian beliefs in their culture. Hinn's case stands out as an anomaly, an Israeli citizen raised in Canada who went on to use his wit to preach the words of his gospel. It wasn't long before Hinn started drawing crowds to his ministry, something that generated a lot of criticism from other Christian leaders. Having grown his following impressively over a few years, Hinn decided to step down as pastor in Orlando and move to Texas. This was when he renamed his church the Faith World Church. Hinn rebranded as Pastor Benny. As a pastor, he turned himself into one of the strongest proponents of prosperity gospel, a commercial approach to faith that allowed him to make millions of dollars. In this system of beliefs, his followers cling to the idea that faith is a source for health, personal success, and of course, wealth. The only way to achieve this was by expressing their faith monetarily, of course. Hinn told his followers that in order to reach prosperity, they should hand seeds of money to the ministry. By doing this, the person will be granted healing and success. The message of prosperity is in the Bible. We cannot deny that if we give, we will receive, is a motto he lived by. At the height of his popularity in the 90s, Pastor Benny drew 7,000 people to his Sunday services. At one point, his miracle crusades would draw around 28,000 people per event. His ministries brought in $15 million a year between donations and his crusades. Of that $15 million, Hinn receives a salary of $116,000, but the holy man claims to return it every year. Hinn preached a humble lifestyle, but an Inside Edition report proved he owned a $685,000 home in Florida and was driving a Mercedes-Benz. As part of a religious organization, he is not under legal pressure to make his finances public nor pay taxes on any income. Perhaps most damning was a plant sent in by Inside Edition who pretend to have cerebral palsy. Hinn brought him up on stage and claimed to heal him. The healing made it on TV. There has been tough criticism pointed at Hinn from all directions, including other Christian ministries, television, and media. Questions about his wealth and the legitimacy of his tactics have been the center of attention for decades. Like many public figures of power, he has granted several TV crews access to his services. For Hinn, the more attention the better. It seems that after the Inside Edition investigation in 1993, the media has been paying close attention to everything Pastor Benny has been doing. This is when the game shifted. Ever since that piece aired, he became very selective about granting interviews, even stating how the Inside Edition coverage was a wake-up call. There was a transformation in his demeanor, and he even cut his hair and stopped wearing his Rolex watches. Unfortunately, this change of faith seems to be a game he plays constantly. But what has gathered the most attention are his claims of being anointed by God. The performances where he is in direct contact with the Holy Ghost and has heavy visions. The control he exerted on his crowds was a hypnotic trick. His combination of subtle, soft words and loud mannerisms took people on a mental journey that made them believe anything. But he insists he is not the healer. God himself works through him. He has gone as far as saying that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit have bodies and souls. This is where most Christians drew the line with him. According to other ministries, this is tritheism, a division of God in three equal parts, which is not what a monotheistic religion like Christianity promotes. Most fraud accusations against Hinn focus on his so-called healing miracles, specifically using the vulnerability of people with terminal illnesses to his advantage. A 2001 documentary called A Question of Miracles focused on the stories behind the people that searched for healing in Pastor Benny's hands. These people believed so strongly that Benny could heal them that they were blind to his charade. They were the sugar pill candidates in a medical trial. In the heat of the moment, right in the middle of Hinn's over-the-top performances, people truly felt like they were being healed. However, no real evidence that they were healed has ever been found. However, the firm belief that they had been in close contact with God through Hinn's hands remained intact. It seemed that a performance like this in front of thousands of people creates a chemical and emotional event that persuades them to do and believe physically impossible things. But were his miracles real? In the documentary, an older woman claims God, through Hinn, healed her broken vertebrae. A logger who needed a double hip replacement claimed he was healed at Hinn's touch. A woman who had both her lungs compromised with cancer was miraculously healthy. Another woman starts jumping with emotion when she can suddenly move her hands. None of these cases were ever confirmed to be any kind of medical miracle. As for the older woman with the broken back, an x-ray after Hinn's event confirmed her back was, indeed, still broken. The logger's hips got worse. The pain became so unbearable he couldn't function. But because of Hinn, he refused pain medication and treatment his doctors called imperative. The woman with lung cancer, whom Hinn claimed to have healed, died 9 months later after her condition worsened. In 2004, an in-depth investigation revealed what was expected. His whole act was a huge scam. The Fifth Estate, an investigative news show from Canadian network CBC, used hidden cameras to blow the lid off of Hinn's ministry. And it turns out everything was a performance. His healings, the arguments he used to confirm his anointing, and even the way they selected those who were to be healed. It was all a sham. A production crew would intercept visibly ill people like quadriplegics and stop them from coming on stage to the healing ritual. One woman in particular was in distress when trying to get her daughter to Hinn. They were crying as they left the arena after being turned away by the crew and not granted the opportunity to be healed by Hinn. One of the most notorious cases was Grace Brulotte, a Canadian girl with curvature of the joint who was hoping to be healed by Hinn. While at a service, her mom tried to approach Pastor Benny, only to be stopped by his screeners, never reaching the stage for the healing. During a service in Toronto, Justin Peters, an evangelist with cerebral palsy who was writing a thesis on Hinn, tried to approach the stage to see Hinn's healing firsthand. Because of his visible disability, he was not allowed anywhere near it. A U.S. Senate investigation was opened in 2007 that targeted several ministries, Hinn included. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley noted the luxury and extravagance many of these preachers live by and wanted the IRS to be more aggressive when investigating their earnings. While the investigation received pushback and backlash from evangelical groups, Hinn decided to cooperate and received praise for his action. The investigation ended in 2011 with no definitive findings, but Grassley was happy to say that some of the investigated preachers vouched to self-reform without the need for government intervention. His lack of transparency has been a constant, even with how he acquires his possessions. A few years ago, he was reported to have actively asked his congregation to donate $1,000 each so he could get himself a private jet. A Gulfstream G4 SP jet was bought with his followers' money in 2007 for a whopping $37 million. And of course, the only way to justify his asking was through God, as he had been chosen by God himself to be sent to help others on his private jet. One of the most shocking revelations was that his nephew, Costi Hinn, a fellow Christian preacher, became publicly outspoken against his uncle. A few years later, in a new investigative report, he speaks about Hinn's manipulation of crowds and the testimonies of healing. He never saw a person be healed by Hinn's hand. He has become one of his biggest opponents, challenging preachers like his uncle who sell deceptive hopes to those in need. Costi Hinn even wrote a book about the $1 million business his uncle created with his miracles. Many have praised Costi's bravery for facing his uncle and exposing the scam behind his business. Hinn's lawyers went public and denied all his nephew's claims, stating they were deceptive. As expected, none of the healed persons recovered because of Hinn. For example, it was a bad lesson, but for others, it was an eye-opening experience. That was the case of little Grace, now a grown woman, who spent most of her life wanting to be healed by Hinn and was rejected. Although her condition is permanent, she was able to teach herself how to excel and live with her condition. She even, for the first time in her life, walked inside a pool. For others, it became a mission of accountability. William Vadelcock, a man who was legally blind, was supposed to be healed by Hinn from his condition when he was 9 years old. He approached Hinn during one of his ceremonies and actually felt like he was seeing people's faces clearly. Hinn had told him he would get 20/20 vision, if not better. He went back home and noticed he couldn't see the TV. Hinn's ministry claimed to have prepared a fundraiser for Vadelcock and his family, but they never saw a penny. When they called to ask about the money raised, they were stalled and taken back and forth between departments. Vadelcock has publicly asked for justice from Hinn, stating he abused people's faith. Although Hinn has been one of the biggest supporters of the prosperity gospel, he's been inconsistent when it comes to sticking with it. While preaching prosperity earned him millions of dollars, he said that receiving money in the name of God is an offense. Hinn was critical and even rejected the prosperity gospel for the first time in the late 80s and then again in the 90s, the time when he decided to cut his hair and stop wearing his Rolex. After a while, though, he seemed to rekindle his love of the gospel and went straight back. The last time he renounced the prosperity gospel was in 2019 during his TV show. Surrounded by a live audience, he went on as far as saying that receiving seed money from his congregation was something offensive to God. Many critics in the Christian world believe he is attempting some sort of damage control, especially regarding all the attention his financial gimmicks have raised with the public and the authorities. And even though Hinn seems to have a profound change of heart, he still lives a remarkably lavish lifestyle. The people that love David Oyedepo really love him. Some say Bishop David Oyedepo has the largest church service in the world, with an alleged 50,000 attending each Sunday service. Some even see him as a god. A man named Adelaja Babatunde gave a shocking testimony about a miracle that happened to him at one of Oyedepo's foot washing services. Babatunde suffered from chronic back pain for 15 years. He's tried everything to relieve the pain, but nothing worked, not even deep tissue massages. So one day, Babatunde decided to attend one of Oyedepo's foot washing services, where the churchgoers wash each other's feet. The odd-sounding practice has been a significant part of Christianity since day one. Jesus washed someone's feet in the Gospels, much to the disappointment of his disciples, who he rebukes and commands to wash other people's feet as he did. So there's a spiritual aspect to washing feet. Babatunde knew this, so he brought a plastic container to the service. Babatunde says that after the service, he went to an usher carrying tubs of foot bath water and asked if he could put some in a container to take home. The usher said yes, and Babatunde poured the murky water into his container. When Babatunde got home, he asked his wife to pour the water on his back, then massage it into the particularly pained areas. After the water soaked into his back, Babatunde's pain was gone and never returned. As it turns out, the water Babatunde took from Pastor Oyedepo's foot wash tub, Babatunde praised God and Oyedepo's feet for miracle healing. He was excited enough to tell his story on camera. The ministry recorded his account and posted it on their YouTube channel. Oyedepo's ministry, Living Faith Church Worldwide, was more than happy to post the video. It exemplifies everything the church stands for. Whatever problem you have, Oyedepo can solve it. However, Oyedepo doesn't require all his followers to rub their problems away with his dirty foot bath water. No, he usually requires something much more ridiculous: money. Pastor Oyedepo preaches what many call a prosperity gospel. Of course, he's not the only one. There are hundreds of preachers who teach this version of Christianity. The most popular is Joel Osteen, and the craziest may just be Kenneth Copeland. However, the most infamous is Jim Bakker, who stole millions from people donating money to his church under the pretense he would use it to further his ministry. Joel Osteen hasn't illegally misappropriated any funds. Still, he does preach essentially the same concept as Bakker and Oyedepo. If you give to God's ministries, then God will reward you with more wealth than you initially gave, like a divine investment of sorts. There are several churches like this in Nigeria, where Oyedepo's flagship church is located. They ask people all around the world to give to God's cause, and the first ministry they recommended above all others is their own. Oyedepo's ministry is sometimes called the Winners Chapel International because their followers supposedly all become winners, and the chapel wanted to manufacture as many winners as possible. It began with what Oyedepo calls an 18-hour vision, which God mandated him to rid the world of evil and oppression in May of 1981. God spoke to him again in 1998, commanding him to build a church big enough to hold his growing congregation. So Oyedepo, backed by divine intervention and the tithes of his followers, built Canaanland, a 50,000-seat megachurch on 530 acres of property. Every Sunday, large double-decker buses round up the 50,000 followers from several towns around the church. From there, the congregates are driven to the church, where they listen to Oyedepo tell them how God will pay them back for giving him their money. They hold pamphlets in their hands while they listen, given to them by a team of friendly ushers at the auditorium doors. There's key information inside the pamphlet that encourages the followers to write down their debit card information. The followers are also encouraged to recruit other people they know to join Winners Chapel. They were instructed to look for a specific type of person, someone depressed, anxious about their health or finances, or lonely. Then they convinced them to visit Winners Chapel. If Oyedepo's followers fulfilled these tasks, they would obtain immunity from an illness in addition to financial prosperity. That sounds like the holiest of pyramid schemes to us. The system of targeted recruitment and divine promises on behalf of God helped Oyedepo build a religious empire. There's a reason the church has worldwide in the title. The question is, with all these tithes coming in, where's the money going? Or, better yet, who's the money going to? We'd be willing to bet it's not going to the big man upstairs. In 2011, a team of Forbes journalists sifted through all of Oyedepo's purchase records. how much he paid for his house, his cars, his investments, and any other assets with a paper trail. The Forbes researchers eventually added up everything and came to a startling conclusion. Pastor Oyedepo was estimated to be worth $150 million, and he doesn't try to hide it. Oyedepo rides around town in a Rolls-Royce Phantom. He flies from church to church in his choice of 2 Gulfstream private jets. His ministry has planted churches all around the world, so he flies quite a lot. The Winners Chapel recently expanded to England, where they opened up churches in London, Liverpool, Birmingham, and Manchester. They even had churches in Dublin, Ireland. The churches targeted the higher than average African and Caribbean immigrants living in those areas. Some of Britain's former colonial subjects still hold close ties, making it easier and more practical to immigrate there. These churches collect unknown sums of money every week because no one actually knows how much comes in. Since Oyedepo is a pastor and his churches are religious institutions, he doesn't have to report his income to anyone. Many experts describe Winners Chapel as a for-profit business. One Daily Mail reporter in England wanted to dig a bit deeper into how Oyedepo used his services to bilk money out of his followers. The journalist attended a Sunday service at Winners Church in Kent, England. He conducted his research undercover, observing the service as any other Winners Chapel follower would. Congregates received the same pamphlets, the same payment instructions. The Mail journalist described seeing around 1,000 immigrants listen to a sermon and several testimonies from Oyedepo's followers. The testimonies were filled with inspiring stories about how God saved their finances. One person told the congregation about how prayer saved him from making a large payment to his bank. The journalist would later compare the religious service to a business conference, with God serving as the product and Oyedepo as the CEO. The Daily Mail continued investigating Oyedepo's churches in the UK. They uncovered what many journalists in Africa already knew. Winners Chapel isn't exactly what it appears to be. The investigative journalists tracked $21 million worth of funds back to several thousand Winners Chapel congregants. The money was donated in exchange for a blessing. Oyedepo's son, David Oyedepo Jr., promised these donors that God would bless them with wealth if they gave money to the ministry. The Daily Mail's report is just another scathing journalist piece on Oyedepo and his laundry list of controversies. Oyedepo's most blatant controversy occurred when he confronted a woman during a Sunday service. The confrontation was captured on video via chapel videographers. The footage shows Oyedepo walking up to the woman and loudly accusing her of being a witch. The religious fervor escalated until Oyedepo decided to rebuke her with a slap to the face. The video was subsequently released online. Internet users on YouTube shared the footage like crazy, with titles like "Pastor Slaps Teenage Girl." Instead of apologizing for the attack, Oyedepo bragged about hitting the girl in a sermon. He even posted the sermon on YouTube. Both Oyedepo's stunt and bragging were picked up by the media. They spread the story far and wide, leading to the so-called witch getting a lot of sympathy from the public. She used her newfound sympathy to file a lawsuit against Oyedepo. For hitting her, publicly humiliating her, and making baseless, unfound claims, she wanted at least $1 million. However, Nigerian courts didn't pick up the case, the woman was never compensated, and Oyedepo was never charged with the crime. Oyedepo's most recent controversy involves the infamous Pandora Papers. In 2021, a massive team of 600 journalists called the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists investigated a tax haven on the British Virgin Islands. After looking through 12 million confidential documents, they compiled their startling findings and released them under the name Pandora Papers. Pandora's box comes from Greek mythology. A woman named Pandora was given a box with something very powerful inside, but she was told never to open it, and inevitably she opens it, and several evil forces are unleashed on the world. The Pandora Papers were much like the mythological box in that they contained the deep, dark financial secrets of the world's wealthiest people, including Pastor Oyedepo's. The paper detailed how in 2007, Oyedepo hired a London-based company called Business Centrum Limited to help him set up a company in the Virgin Islands. Business Centrum, in turn, subcontracted another company called Trident Trust Group, which officially set up a company called Zadok Investments Limited. Zadok was then handed over to Oyedepo, who immediately bought $50,000 worth of shares. It's very common for someone hiding money to go through multiple companies. Oyedepo wanted to make it as difficult as possible for authorities to track down the origins of Zadok, so the more complex, the better. Oyedepo was the only person to buy shares of Zadok, a company with no employees, no CEO, no products, and no revenue. Just a name on some documents. In the tax evading business, this is just a shell company. Several offshore firms were tasked with keeping Zadok and many other shell companies a secret, but they had a major leak not long after Oyedepo created his company. The ICIJ found the info and started their investigation. They found that Oyedepo had created Zadok for his family. His son, Oyedepo Jr., was given 10%. His two daughters, Love and Joy, were given 10% each. His son Isaac, also a winner's pastor, received 10%. Oyedepo and his wife Faith are the largest shareholders at 30%. As of now, Oyedepo hasn't been charged or prosecuted for tax evasion and fraud. Oyedepo hasn't been prosecuted for running any scams, slapping witches, or committing tax evasion. In fact, Oyedepo has only expanded his ministry and increased his revenue stream. Most people of his caliber get caught by this point in their career. American pastors such as Robert Tilton and Jim Baker were either being investigated or being prosecuted by this point. SPAC Nation is an evangelical church in London. They focus on saving and serving at-risk youth in the community, and by that we mean scamming and lying to at-risk youth. Crooked pastors such as Miriam Mbula and founder Toby Adegboyiga have been at the center of controversy since the church's inception. But still, teenagers and millennials give money to them in hopes of turning their life around. The church pastors even forced their followers to sell blood for donation money. Officially named the Salvation Proclaimers Anointed Church, SPAC Nation first appeared in 2008. Created by Pastor Toby Adegboyiga, the church only had 3 members in its early stages. SPAC is based in South London and is known for its direct approach to getting criminals off the streets by inviting gang members to their services and asking them to drop their weapons. These tactics gained them the media attention needed to grow their church. SPAC continued its mission with a particular target in mind: people under 30 who lived in dangerous areas of London. SPAC became a popular community outreach program that received praise from the media and even the Metropolitan Police. SPAC operates in neighborhoods with high crime rates and a population consisting of primarily black millennials. Their weapon exchange program got the attention of both the Conservative and Labour parties. The program asked former gang members to hand over their weapons, which SPAC pastors then gave to the London police. The church has also found creative ways to attract more people to their services. SPAC formed rap and R&B groups to perform and sing songs about salvation and Jesus. However, the leaders of those groups would soon become the loudest voices speaking out against SPAC. Before the SPAC controversy became mainstream, they grew their member base from less than 300 in 2016 to 2,000 in 2020. SPAC has taken its time to get to know its congregation and exploits the lavish lifestyles of its pastors to lure more black millennials to their church. The pastors dress in expensive clothes, wear high-end jewelry, and drive fancy cars. To the public, SPAC's mission seemed well-intentioned. According to the people they've scammed, there is a lot to be discovered. The church faces many accusations of misusing funds and impersonating its members to open bank accounts on their behalf. One specific case regarding a 19-year-old woman named Lovis stands out. The girl, who was staying at one of the church's youth houses, said SPAC took out a £5,000 bank loan in her name without her even knowing about it. SPAC used the £5,000 to create a company on her behalf, from which they transferred the money to a different set of companies owned by SPAC pastors. When she confronted the pastors, they told her it was for the greater good and that the money will buy a bigger youth house. Of course, as expected, Lovis would have to deal with the loan payments herself, which added up to £10,000. Sadly, nobody knows what happened to the money afterward. As if it weren't enough, some people have even come forward saying they were forced to take out a universal credit, a type of welfare in the UK, only to get half the money. There have been reports of sign-up days in which up to 50 young people would sign up to get the government benefit. Once approved, SPAC would take half the money. They targeted vulnerable young people to gain their trust before asking them for ridiculous amounts of money. If the person said they wouldn't be able to get that money, the church would suggest a bank loan. Pastor Samuel Akokia asked a young man to take out a £20,000 loan to fund an investment opportunity. When the man became suspicious and asked for proof, Akokia became angry and asked if he was doubting a man of God. Pastors and high leaders within the church would pressure their followers to fork over more money. When it didn't work, SPAC just took the money anyway. They had all of the bank information they needed to apply for loans in their followers' names. One young man left the church after he was scammed out of £2,000, but then received a letter in the mail saying he'd been accepted for a £5,000 loan. The biggest project funded by SPAC was their trap houses. As confusing as the name may be, trap homes were meant to save young gang members from violence in the streets. TRAP stood for Take Risks and Prosper, a way to change the narratives and lives of at-risk SPAC members. In these houses, young people lived close to pastors in the church to keep them away from crime. The media reported on the project and praised how it allowed young black people to get out of gangs and violence. Many of the kids even said they would be dead if it weren't for the trap house. Members of the British Parliament called these houses a holistic solution to the rise of fatal knife crimes in London. But the stories coming out of these houses were far from a fairy tale. Reports of mistreatment within the houses surfaced, with a specific case of a 16-year-old girl stating she was mistreated in one of the trap houses. Another incident where a young boy said he had been whipped with a belt while a pastor recited some Bible verses was quickly dismissed by the church as a joke. One trap house was run by Miriam Mbula, the queen bee of SPAC scams. She ran her trap house strictly and pressured young women into handing over all their personal and financial information. She said she'd be managing their accounts and asked them to take out £5,000 loans to keep the church's mission going. Given the negative attention the trap houses were receiving, SPAC Nation quickly, publicly distanced itself from the project, saying they were independently run houses. However, they were clearly promoting them as SPAC safe houses all over social media. One of the most notorious pastors within SPAC Nation is Miriam Mbula. Known also as Miriam Mola, among other aliases, Mbula has a laundry list of fraud convictions in the UK, Spain, and Belgium. She had been busted while running a gang of thieves targeting luxury fashion brands all over Europe. By age 26, she had already been to jail 5 separate times. If Mbula is known for something other than her convictions, it's the way she's chosen to share her life story on social media. During her last stint in prison, she was 8 months pregnant. Forced to give birth in jail, she used the story to advertise a healed persona, making it seem like she'd turned her life around. Her story was even featured on some of the UK's most watched talk shows. She decided to become a mentor for women, using her embellished life story to create yet another fraudulent business. Mentor Matcher. People saw her as a philanthropist. Really, she used her way with words to persuade women into investing in her company, scamming more people along the way. Some victims claim she took between £77,000 to £100,000. Many women opened up about being scammed by Mbula. Her response was to stay quiet. It's clear she has become an expert in laying low and resurfacing with a whole new personality, which is what she did with SPAC Nation. She reappeared as an ordained minister of the church and started preaching the prosperity gospel, using her life story as the main attraction. As expected, Mbula didn't change that much. This time, she used the structure SPAC was providing to profit from vulnerable women. Many of her victims said they were impressed when they first met her, given her lavish lifestyle that included expensive clothes and dinners at top-notch restaurants in London. She targeted young, vulnerable women with good credit scores or who had not taken out loans in the past. Then she forced them to get money and give it to her. Since most of the girls were staying in her safe house, Miriam had control over them. Along with high leaders from SPAC Nation, she used their power to force young people into doing whatever they could to give them more money. To top it off, she never kept up with loan payments, letting the brunt of the money fall on her victims. While she was off partying and living in luxury, the at-risk millennials she was supposed to be helping were left to handle the banks. SPAC Nation has become a clever organization when it comes to luring young people into its ranks, and Mbula isn't the only one doing it. Knowing how gullible a young person from an impoverished background can be, SPAC pastors created novelty schemes to secure more fraudulent loans. On one occasion, 28-year-old Toy, a churchgoer, was pressured by her pastor, George Jumbo, to get a £5,000 loan. She had only met him a few months prior. He even sent her a video waving a large wad of cash stemming from his successful crypto trading business. Toy, trusting his guidance, and decided to invest in his business using money from multiple loans, even allowing him to apply for a loan on her behalf. At the time, the loans fell through, but she'd already handed over all of her personal information to Jumbo. Then, 2 years later, she received letters stating she'd been approved for a loan she knew nothing about. The letters and loans kept coming in. Soon Jumbo had acquired more than £10,000 of loans in her name. Another scheme included signing up for Universal Credit. SPAC used their trap houses as the scene for large-scale sign-ups. They had an actual Universal Credit representative take applications and formed a line of about 50 young people to enlist in the government program. They would hand over their passports and IDs and were told their names would not appear in the official data, so it would look like they hadn't even been enrolled. Some members found themselves in £1,000 worth of debt, even when they were told they wouldn't have to pay anything. SPAC members would even use WhatsApp and Snapchat to pressure victims into taking loans as soon as possible. But this wasn't enough for SPAC Nation. Apparently, the church went as far as asking youngsters to donate blood for medical trials. SPAC members were paid £100 to donate blood for medical trials, which they'd turn around and hand over to their pastors. Known as bleeding for seed, the church considered the blood money a donation offering from its members. Mbula, one of the pastors in charge of the scheme, pressured youngsters via WhatsApp, actively asking them for their seed. As the public became more aware of SPAC Nation's tactics, a group of victims banded together to raise their voices over the injustices they went through in the church. Let the Youngsters Go is a group of former churchgoers and workers who claim that SPAC preachers exploited them for money. They actively campaigned for young SPAC members to be set free from the church and any wrongful debt acquired while a member. One of the group's members, Take Mad Max Mukuna, who had joined SPAC back in 2018 and remained there for 10 months, fronts the church's rap group and feels responsible for so many people getting involved with it. When in church, Mukuna says he started having disagreements with Pastor Toby about his lyrics. He wanted to leave but felt pressured to stay. Now he sees a lot of people coming out of the church and speaking up against it. On one occasion, there was a public clash between the group and SPAC members, which had to be dismantled by the police, effectively protecting SPAC from the attack. Their financial schemes were pretty blunt. They put a lot of emphasis on donation, forcing people to donate seed money if they wanted to continue to come to their services. A significant part of their service revolved around cash, getting it, motivating others to give it, and investing it. Some victims felt they were pressured to give the church money, and because of the prosperity preachings, they thought they'd get their money back tenfold. At one point, Pastor Toby was reported to asking specific amounts of money through an entry fee. There would be an envelope that asked for a £200 minimum donation. While there have been several allegations of fraud since 2019, it wasn't until 2020 that the Metropolitan Police started investigating SPAC Nation. According to the media, there are at least 20 active cases that authorities are looking into. SPAC Nation has denied these allegations, stating they have a robust system to handle all their complaints and that they would not respond to any of the individual claims about their pastors. According to SPAC, they cannot monitor what each pastor or leader does. As of 2020, Pastor Toby has stepped down from the newly named Annexation Church. He was replaced by pastors Dami Balogun and Samuel Akohia, who've racked up numerous fraud claims against them. While Pastor Toby published a press release saying he was leaving, it was unclear whether he was honest about it because he said he would still be leading the church publicly. On top of this, 2 people involved with the church have been arrested on fraud allegations presented in early 2020. Police claim these charges are targeted at the pastors, not the organization. As for Miriam Mbula, she's still free. Although she is part of the ongoing investigation, there is no clear sign she's stopped her scamming. No stint in prison is enough to turn Miriam from her scamming ways. So one question remains. Will she ever be caught? Who are some of the worst convicted pastors? Let's get right into it. Number 3, preaching real estate. Larry Hawley, a pastor at Abundant Life Ministries in Flint, Michigan, ran a scam that involved convincing longtime members to invest in real estate with him, then lying about where the money was going. The prominent community figure hustled no small number of churchgoers, and unlike most Ponzi schemes, many of those he swindled never saw a penny back on their investment. Larry Hawley has never been in it alone. From the scam's supposed 2014 beginning, Patricia Gray has been there. Sources don't go too deep into how the pair met, calling Gray a paid associate. It can be assumed that they met through Hawley's position in the church. With Gray by his side, Hawley would hold Blessed Life conferences to find suckers. The duo would go from church to church across America to convince retirees and other vulnerable folk to hand over their cash, which went into an account tied to Hawley's business. He would pray with the churchgoers and tell them that God wants them to invest. The two came to these conferences prepared, with tons of fraudulent materials showing things like real estate that they managed, checks showing payouts to investors, and statements showing cash flowing into the business. With all this evidence, Hawley finished strong with an appeal to faith. Sowing your seed for your need is an extremely common idea in evangelical Christianity, so nobody batted an eye. The idea was sound, and at least on paper, a pastor is a much more trustworthy investment manager than a banker, and there was evidence that business was booming. Gray, meanwhile, took to a local radio station to advertise. Billing herself as a personal wealth coach, she would tell potential investors that she had helped people to multiply their money before. Her entire pitch platform was built on past successes that did not exist. Holly and Gray ran the scam through a business meant to manage the investments. Known as Treasure Enterprise LLC, the business was supposed to be a front for managing real estate investments, but in reality, a good chunk of the money was funneled back to Holly and Gray. Much of it was also used for the benefit of the church. In typical Ponzi scheme fashion, of course, some of the cash made its way back to older investors. Holly and Gray would have people fill out cards showing their current financial holdings to get a better feel for who was ripe for scamming. They would pray with their flock over these cards and pull aside certain potential suckers to talk in more detail about what Treasure could do for them. In many cases, people were encouraged to yank money out of more legitimate investments, or even take out personal loans that Holly promised to pay back for them. Alongside all of this, Gray's catches through her financial coaching hustle began to find a type. When all this was going on, the local auto factory scene was going through major changes. A significant number of people were getting laid off, making their severance packages ripe for the picking. These folks, much like the scam's main targets, had lumps of cash sitting around. Treasure's real estate portfolio was vast, made up mostly of commercial properties that could be rented out or otherwise milked for a stream of income. On paper, these investments and their returns were supposed to power the promised 7 to 10% returns that Holly and Gray were presenting to investors in the beginning. That number would jump well into the 20% range before it was all said and done. The high promised returns were appealing, but a lot of the people scammed were vulnerable and in need of something secure. Holly and Gray were happy to oblige. The pair promised that each investment would go through a period of use where investors would be getting interest payments. Then, when that was over, the principal would be returned. They also told investors that Treasure had plenty of cash on hand in case anybody wanted to bow out early, which was a blatant lie. As an added layer of false security, Holly and Gray promised that investments would be placed into retirement accounts, which held some tax exemptions and potential for extra returns in the form of interest. That didn't happen. Instead, when Holly put the money directly into Treasure's business accounts, he passed tax liability onto the investors, financially straining many of them. One investor who took out about $500,000 in personal loans to put into the scam ended up having to file bankruptcy in 2016. The way that Holly and Gray were painting everything, investors were in for some easy cash flow. Treasure had some legitimate investments, so maybe that was, to some extent, the original plan. Naturally, that did not end up being the case. Holly and Gray pulled massive amounts of money straight out of Treasure for their own gain. The two reportedly put out $600,000 right into their own pockets throughout the course of the scam. A big chunk of the money also went into keeping Abundant Life afloat. The real estate investments themselves were real, but they weren't panning out nearly as well as the scammers had hoped. It's possible that the original plan was to sit back and collect rent checks and interest, but what actually happened was that the investments failed spectacularly. Treasure and other companies with ties to Holly had dozens of properties, and they all ended up in the hands of authorities. When investments started floundering, investors stopped getting their promised payouts. At first, the scammy duo kept things smooth by making excuses and further promises, along with the occasional payment using new investors' money. In 2017, people began complaining loudly and publicly, and this got the attention of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The fact that the scammers had never registered with the SEC and had no business hawking securities was more than enough to spur the commission into decisive action. In March of that year, the commission made a civil filing against the pair. The investigation turned up 142 victims who had collectively lost out on an eye-watering $9 million. This, of course, was just what they had lost. It didn't even touch the amounts that were promised by Holly and Gray. As if the ship wasn't already sinking fast enough, the commercial properties held by Treasure fell behind on their taxes. This meant that they ended up on the county rolls for foreclosure and sale to recover back taxes. An asset freeze, along with various orders keeping Gray and Holly from continuing business and plotting together, put the whole thing underwater. In 2018, the case was brought into federal court. Proceedings dragged on as they had every step of the way. After all, there was a lot to unpack here. Just how much of the business was legitimate? How much damage did the two cause? What information could they give to help recover assets? And what could be done for the victims? Holly and Gray pleaded guilty in 2019 and both received prison sentences. Holly was doomed to serve about 8 years in prison, while Gray got a 4-year sentence for her part. With both of them barred from conducting further business of the sort that got them into trouble, they'll be virtually unable to reoffend upon getting out. Holly's attorney, however, has laid out a challenge to the sentence. According to him, Holly's health is failing and he requires care that he can only get on the outside. This means that his sentence is essentially a death sentence and is thus a violation of due process. Additionally, he claimed that Holly had no malicious intent and didn't see any personal gain. Instead, the attorney said that Holly was moving the money around in unorthodox and risky ways because of his confidence in its return and increase. As of this writing, both scammers are still in prison despite the challenge. Number 2, scamming again. Kent Whitney, a former options trader out of California, built at least $33 million from unsuspecting investors by starting a fake church. He did this hand in hand with one David Lee Parrish, who had helped with a previous scam. That previous investment scam raked in about $600,000, but also got Whitney 44 months in jail. He had also suffered temporary brokering bans in the past due to margin call fraud, wherein he took steps to avoid telling people whose accounts he managed that they were getting low on funds. Whitney used his previous position in the investment space to lure investors under false pretenses. This time, however, he took a slightly different approach. He became a pastor. Even so, in the typical investment scam fashion, the money went almost nowhere but his own pockets. When authorities busted the whole thing open, they have only managed to track down $4.3 million of the missing funds thus far. Whitney began laying the groundwork for his fake church while he was in prison. It all came to fruition in August of 2014 when he went through an online program to become an ordained minister. From there, he established an online church with sermons, prayer requests, and more, all managed from a rented space in a strip mall. The Church for the Healthy Self, or CHS, spent 2014 to 2018 swelling its ranks and hawking a phony investment program. In 2018, Parrish joined up as a pastor, and things kicked into high gear. The local Vietnamese community was targeted in particular, with the church even putting out a TV commercial about their church and investment program in Vietnamese. The two running the show claimed the investments had an income tax incentive and were even insured by the FDIC. Obviously, this didn't end up being the case. Before the SEC swooped in and shut it down, Whitney and Parrish had promised investors 12% returns on YouTube, continued seeking funding after the FBI froze their assets, and even convinced one unfortunate investor to transfer their long-running IRA to the church. The SEC put in an official complaint against CHS in 2019. By 2020, the matter was in front of a federal judge. The case ended up being pretty cut and dried. Both fake pastors pled guilty in the end to multiple charges. Whitney, being the ringleader and main perpetrator in this newest scam and a previous one, got the harsher sentence, 14 years in federal prison. Parrish, meanwhile, was sentenced to 1 year and 3 days, along with 3 years of supervised release. Number 1, churches only. Coming around to our last story, we're flipping the script. Instead of a pastor running scams, we've got a guy that ran scams on churches. Florida man Philip Conley defrauded a number of churches throughout West Virginia, among other entities, with fake investment accounts. It wasn't that hard for somebody with his background. Up until 2014, he was a broker with finance giant Merrill Lynch. A previous crime saw his license get taken away in 2015, but authorities couldn't take away his industry know-how. West Virginia State Attorney William J. Illenfeld II dug in deep to get the details on Conley's exploits. He managed to drum up millions of dollars from victims in a number of areas, but he did it all using fairly ordinary tactics. The main thing that set him apart from other scammers of his kind was his knack for falsifying documents, leading would-be investors to believe that they were putting their cash into something of real value. He did it all under the front of Alpax LLC, a company that he put together after leaving Merrill Lynch. Just about anybody can register for an LLC these days, so he didn't need accomplices to make his newest scam look legit. All he had to do was print up convincing documents on company letterhead that pointed to lucrative, high-value investments. The fake investments included things like timber releases and student housing construction. fortune. He would show these to victims to get them on board, but when it came time to pay out, he would always come up dry. In most Ponzi schemes, you have to throw a little bit back at older investors to keep them from suspecting anything. Somehow, Conley managed to skip that step and keep the scam running until 2020. When the hammer dropped on Conley, it dropped hard. There was initially talk of much larger judgments and longer sentences, but the scammer ultimately got about 7 years for his troubles. Alongside the prison time, he was ordered to forfeit anything he bought with his ill-gotten gains. Since he got away with about $5 million and only some $200,000 made its way back to investors, his high-on-the-hog life came crashing down in just as grand a fashion as he lived it. Naturally, a monetary judgment was thrown in for good measure. Conley's been ordered to fork over roughly $4.8 million, which would just about square up the amount he took versus the amount he already gave back. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comment section what you think is worst, prosperity preachers or call center scammers.